Welcome to this explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to demystify the honestly pretty fascinating world of commerce, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going back to basics. We're going to break down how human society actually functions, survives, and prospers through trade. Let's dive right in. Here's a quick roadmap of where we're headed today. We'll start with India's golden trade history, then ask, what exactly is business? Break down the anatomy of business, look beyond just making profit, face the reality of business risk, and finally, talk about starting your own enterprise. All right, Part 1, India's golden trade history, also known as the era of Swaran Bharat. To really grasp modern business, we kind of need to zoom out and look at the macro context. And honestly, the sheer scale of ancient wealth is just staggering. Back in the 1st century AD, India controlled a massive 32% of the world's wealth. 32%. It was the largest economy of the ancient and medieval world. And why? Because they had absolute mastery over global trade routes, both the Silk Route and maritime trade. Ancient travelers literally called the Indian subcontinent Swaran Bharat, meaning the Golden Land. But, things shifted dramatically. By 1870, under the British Empire, India was reduced to basically an exporter of raw materials, holding just 9.2% of global income. Fast forward in 1991, and economic liberalization finally opened the doors to rebuild that lost momentum. The takeaway here? That massive ancient wealth was built entirely on the back of trade and commerce. And speaking of ancient commerce, let's look at how those merchants solved some incredibly massive logistical problems. Imagine you're trading spices and silk across thousands of miles. Traveling those distances back then involved a huge, very real risk of theft. You couldn't exactly just carry chests of gold around, right? So Indian merchant communities popularized something called the hundi system. Think of it as an unconditional contractual promise, written in vernacular languages, that allowed for the safe, entirely cashless transfer of money. It's essentially the grandfather of modern banking, a completely brilliant, intangible form of exchange born purely out of the necessity to keep commerce flowing safely. Moving on to Part 2, what exactly is business? Defining the engine of society. So, we've seen how commerce builds entire nations, but what actually constitutes this engine of society? We tend to lump all work together, but building a business and having a traditional job are two entirely different beasts. Employment is based on a service agreement. You show up, you need zero capital, you get a fixed salary, and you take on very little risk. But a business? A business is born from an entrepreneur's deliberate decision. It requires upfront capital. The profits are completely uncertain, and risk is literally always looming. Understanding this difference is all about shifting your mindset from being a job seeker to becoming a job provider. Okay, so let's look at this strict DNA of a business. First, it's an economic activity, meaning it's done to earn a livelihood, not just out of love or charity. It obviously involves producing or procuring goods and services. But here is a really vital piece of the puzzle: regular dealings. This is absolutely essential. Look, if you sell your old radio to a friend for a quick profit, that doesn't mean you're in business. But if you sell radios regularly from a shop, now you're in business. Add in the motive to earn profit, the absolute uncertainty of what your return will actually be, and that ever-present element of risk we talked about, and boom, you have the complete picture of a commercial enterprise. Part 3, the anatomy of business. Let's visualize the machine. Now that we know what a business is, we need to break down how commerce actually functions in the real world. The whole business ecosystem splits into two primary branches: industry and commerce. Industry is all about making things, whether that's extracting resources like mining, breeding poultry, or manufacturing and assembling parts into a car. But here's the catch: industry alone just isn't enough. You can make 1 million cars, but they're completely useless if they just sit in a factory. That is where commerce comes in. Commerce is the machine that takes the goods produced by industry and gets them into the hands of the people who actually need them. But trade doesn't happen in a vacuum. It relies on what we call auxiliaries to trade. You can think of these as the circulatory system of the economy. For example, if tea is produced in Assam, but the consumer's all the way in Gujarat, you've got a physical hindrance of place. Transport removes that hindrance. If goods are produced now but aren't needed until next month, warehousing removes the hindrance of time, banking removes the hindrance of finance, and advertising removes the hindrance of information. These support services are really the unsung heroes that make large-scale global commerce even possible. Part 4. Beyond just making profit. Time to bust the ultimate myth. It is time to challenge a massive assumption about what actually drives business. If you ask anyone on the street, they'll probably tell you it's just about greed, it's all about making a quick buck. But the reality is way more nuanced. Yes, obviously, profit is the lifeblood. You literally cannot survive without it, kind of like a human can't survive without oxygen. But if a business becomes entirely obsessed with profit, to the point where they neglect their customers, exploit their employees, or just ignore society, well, they're going to face fierce opposition. Exploiting society for immediate profit always backfires in the long run. The business will simply fail. Because of that, a truly successful modern business has to balance multiple objectives to survive. It needs market standing, building goodwill and a distinct identity. It needs constant innovation, always modifying products and skills, because let's face it, if you aren't innovating, you're dying. It needs increasing productivity, making the best possible use of resources. And crucially, it requires social responsibility. Contributing to solving social problems isn't just some nice PR stunt. It is absolutely non-negotiable for lasting, sustainable success. Part 5. The reality of business risk. No risk, no gain. To really get commerce, we have to talk about the inescapable weight every single entrepreneur carries: risk. And risk isn't just a monolith. There are two very different flavors here. First up, we have speculative risk. This is where there's a possibility of both gain and loss. Think about, say, a sudden change in fashion trends or a shift in market demand. If you guess right, you win big, but if you guess wrong, you lose. Then we have pure risk. This is the stuff of nightmares where there's only the possibility of loss, like a fire in your warehouse or a massive theft. Non-occurrence just means you didn't lose anything. You don't magically gain money because a fire didn't happen. It's so important to understand this vocabulary because profit is simply the reward for taking on those speculative risks. So what actually causes these risks? What's keeping business owners awake at night? We can categorize them pretty neatly. First, natural causes, like floods or earthquakes, things humans have absolutely zero control over. Then, human causes, such as employee negligence, strikes, or riots. And finally, economic causes, like sudden price changes, rising interest rates, or fierce new competition. The main takeaway here is that risk is an essential, totally unavoidable part of every single business. You can minimize it, sure, but you can never entirely eliminate it. Part 6. Starting your own enterprise. The micro application. We've talked a lot about macro theory, but let's bring this home. Let's look at how you actually apply this and walk through the step-by-step reality of getting a new enterprise off the ground. Step 1, you have to select the type and size of the business based on customer requirements and your own technical knowledge. Step 2, choose your location carefully. A bad location means high costs and terrible logistics. Step 3, finance the proposition. Figure out exactly where your fixed and working capital is coming from. Step 4, secure your physical facilities and hire a competent, committed workforce. And finally, Step 5, you launch the enterprise, fulfill all the legalities, and kick off your sales. As you can see, it is a pretty rigorous, demanding process. But I want to show you that this isn't just about spreadsheets and logistics. It's about real people solving deep human problems. Take the story of Deepak Barali. He was from a tight-knit community of silk weavers in Swalkuchi, Assam. The traditional process of buta weaving there was incredibly slow, mentally draining, and just physically exhausting. When Deepak wanted to expand his weaving business, pretty much everyone told him to just buy more manual looms. But he was frustrated by that. He didn't just want more of the same exhausting work. He wanted a true innovation to actually automate the process. And this right here perfectly illustrates the heart of entrepreneurship. Deepak remembered a childhood game his brother used to play with an electromagnet, and he pushed himself to think completely outside the box. After a mind-boggling 80 tries, he finally succeeded. He developed an eco-friendly device out of recyclable materials called Chanakhi. And get this, it made the manual weft insertion run 40 times faster. He took a massive speculative risk, invested his own time and capital, and his invention revolutionized the productivity of his entire community, pleasing both the owners and the workers alike. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. We've seen how commerce built ancient empires, we've unpacked the DNA of a business, the mechanics of industry and trade, and the immense weight of risk that entrepreneurs carry every day to innovate and push society forward. The ones who carve their own route are the real risk takers. So I want to leave you with this empowering question. We know business builds nations, but what problem will your business solve? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.